Hello everyone and welcome back to Wildlight. I'm Gray Wilder and today we're going real nostalgic. So I wanted to make this episode about childhood nature media, and the reason I wanted to cover this today is that I was kind of feeling a lot of nostalgia today because if you follow me, I am a researcher that is currently abroad studying human-wildlife coexistence in Nepal, and I am someone who has been passionate about wildlife conservation since I can remember. Like, I've always loved nature and animals and cared about the environment. So I wanted to kind of go over what some of the most inspirational childhood media that I saw, and I think a lot of people who appreciate nature and have a very intrinsic value of nature tended to know or have seen or valued this childhood nature media as a kid. And I think I just found it really fascinating how media can inspire so many kids to appreciate nature even when they didn't grow up surrounded by it. Because for me, I grew up around the city of Chicago, so I wasn't surrounded by nature. I saw squirrels, chipmunks, and the animals at the Lincoln Park Zoo when I got the chance. That was kind of the extent of it. I mean, there were some nature preserves, but it was it wasn't there weren't many opportunities to experience nature like that. And so nature media was something that was crucial in my upbringing and my journey with appreciating nature. So without more delay, I've been talking a bunch about that. I kind of wanted to go over some examples of nature media throughout history. And so some of them are going to be a little bit more older and some of them are going to be more modern. And if I'm missing any, please let me know in the comments. I really want to explore childhood nature media, because another thing that really interests me about that is I am a children's book author. I've published 5 books. All of them are kids' books relating to kindness, the planet, and wildlife science. So for me, this is, I've always been inspired by childhood nature media, and the first thing I wanted to do as a teenager was create some of my own. And one of mine, called Perry and Friends, which is a children's book focusing on Perry the penguin and his friends discovering what climate change is and how they can help. That book ended up getting recognized at the Folklife Festival in Washington, D.C. And so again, the childhood nature media is very close to my heart, very close to my career and my fascination with nature. So, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate. This media and this creativity is what reaches a lot of people and gets them interested and value nature in itself. So I'm going to pull out my notes here and talk about some of the most iconic examples of this. So one of them that I found that I actually had never heard of, and maybe this is giving away my age, but FernGully, it's called FernGully, the last rainforest. And so the plot summary is that forest fairies battle to save their home from pollution and deforestation. And from what I got from this, I think this was published in the 80s. And it was one of the first kids movies that introduced children to environmental threats like logging and pollution in an accessible, kind of magical way. And this production, FernGully, had a very tangible, real world influence. It sparked classroom discussions, school projects, and even inspired a lot of early environmental activism, which I think is a perfect example of again, how this childhood nature media exemplifies getting kids invested and interested in protecting Earth and feel inspired that they can. We want to make sure that this isn't like pushing them to believe that they have no say, or believe that they, that there's no hope. We want to make sure that they have hope for the future, but also see the urgency within that. And I think FernGully is a really interesting example of that most early environmental education media. Because it was in the 80s, I believe there was a lot less discussion about that, and I think it's really fascinating that that program became so famous and widely known. And another one that I wanted to talk about is the Lorax by Dr. Seuss. And this one's a really interesting one because it's been going around on TikTok so much lately. I've been seeing those like Lorax edits, and it's so funny. Like, I never saw that in that way as a kid. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but yeah. One of the most memorable quotes from the movie is, quote, "I speak for the trees have no tongues." So I think this is a really good example again of like some really popular media that inspired kids to think about the environment in a new way. And it warns against unchecked industrialization and the consequences of ignoring environmental stewardship. So the kids could see, for the first time, in my opinion, I think I was probably introduced to the industrialization part through the Lorax, because it was displayed in a way, that acknowledged the corporation influence on the environmental movement, which I think is a hard topic to touch on for kids stuff, because corporations are so powerful and influential. And this was a really good way to kind of introduce that, the big bad and the little good, that spark of grassroots efforts to make sure that the environment was still being stewarded and cared about and conserved. So again, the Lorax kind of had this cultural legacy of becoming a symbol for environmental advocacy and is referenced in a lot of campaigns to this day, and referenced on social media like all the time. You still see like the Lorax being represented every Halloween. Like, this is completely one of the most iconic and well-known characters and well-known plots of any childhood nature media as it is. And another one that I've saw a lot, I didn't necessarily grow up with this one. I never watched this, but I know that it influenced a lot of my friends' lives. My Neighbor Totoro. And I'm sorry if I messed that up. I think it's My Neighbor Totoro. And the plot summary is basically two sisters encounter magical creatures in rural Japan, forming a deep bond with their natural surroundings. And what stands out most about this show is the artistic vision for it. I mean, I've seen so many clips as I got older, and like and even seen like a lot more of this being represented, I think, in a nostalgic sense. Like I kind of missed the era of like it being shown a lot, or like I didn't really grow up with it, but then like when I grow older, it was represented in a lot of like nostalgic media, either on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, or even in real life, with my friends kind of referencing it as one of the pinnacle points of their connection to nature. And again, the artistic style is so unique. And I also have watched a lot of behind the scenes of the artist of My Neighbor Totoro. Totoro. Oh my god, I'm actually gonna get like eaten up by my friends for mispronouncing this. It's not even that hard. And that artistic style, the artist and his vision for this show, and also like other Studio Ghibli productions, is a lush, detailed animation that kind of celebrates the beauty of serenity of the countryside in Japan, and also just like that magical world of nature. And I think it has a lot of subtle lessons to it, and that subtlety makes it still like entertaining to children, and you know, peaceful to watch. From my point of view, it's like, you know, it moves kind of slower than a lot of the media that I was used to as a kid, and I appreciated that about it. You know, it's just, it really values you soaking in the natural value of how magical nature looks. And again, about the subtle lessons, it encourages a lot more respect for nature, patience, like I was saying, and observation. So again, like those qualities shown kind of are lacking in a lot of modern fast-paced shows, or even modern life in general. I think is very fast-paced, at least in America where I'm from. I think that it's really good to get out of that and watch something that's still entertaining and magical, but more peaceful and slower paced. So yeah, I really appreciate that about My Neighbor Totoro. And another favorite of mine growing up was the movie Bambi. And I felt like Bambi was kind of in the realm of princess movies in a way, because it was Disney, and I was a Disney nerd as a kid. I really like watched everything Disney. And what I think is really interesting about Bambi is that it has a lot of emotional storytelling. I mean, it really made almost everyone cry, you know? The loss of Bambi's mother is a formative moment in not only the character's Bambi's life, but subsequently children's lives, you know, as they understand grief, as they understand emotional intelligence and empathy. It also highlights the vulnerability of wildlife, and gives a sense of empathy to animals. And what I found really interesting about this while I was researching is there's something called the Bambi effect. And research shows that seeing animals as individuals with personalities, like shown in the movie Bambi, increases empathy and support for conservation. So I think naming this effect, the Bambi effect, is so telling, that Bambi had such a critical role to play when thinking about childhood media and reflecting on the importance of certain shows as children that taught us emotional growth and intelligence and grief and sadness and just empathy for other animals and living creatures. It also had an influence on policy. The film was credited with influencing attitudes towards hunting and wildlife protection, which I think is super, super interesting. I mean, it's not very often that a film has that sort of policy like impact. I think it's very rare, in fact. And so I really appreciate that about Bambi. Next, I wanted to talk about wildcrats. So this is the last example on my list, and for a good reason, because I am going to talk about this for a while. I grew up on wildcrats. Like, I actually watched Zaboomafoo after Wildcrats, because I grew up in the time that was like peak Wildcrats popularity, and then afterward found Zaboomafoo and really enjoyed that too. So when I talk about Wildcrats, it is the iconic childhood nature media for me. Like, that was my end-all be-all. Like, I watched probably every single episode of Wildcrats twice, I'm not gonna lie. And every episode is a boomafoo too. So if you don't know what Wildcrats is or Zaboomafoo, they are both hosted by the Krat brothers, who are both naturalists with degrees and science communicators. And so it has an educational approach to the show, and it blends adventure with real animal science, and it teaches kids about habitats, adaptations, and ecosystems. So it has a lot of interactive elements to it, which I really valued. So like, viewers are encouraged to think like scientists, ask questions, and imagine themselves as wildlife protectors. And I think one of the things that was my favorite about those shows was they blended animation with like real life cutscenes at the beginning and end. And so they had the Krat brothers in real life kind of narrating like, we're the Krat brothers, and you know, this is a story about this animal, and you could be a wildlife protector too. And it was very engaging for me as a kid, and I always appreciated how they empowered us as kids to be able to do something about it. Because for me, I think I was very pained in middle school and high school with the fact that I was held back so much by my age. I felt like I was ready to like go out and do this science and contribute to the world and do activism. And so, you know, if you have followed me, you know that like I did do a lot. Like I published books, I had a podcast, I had a blog, but I still felt like tied back by my age. You know, I really wanted to make an impact, and I wasn't seeing that. Even if I was going to council meetings every week, you know, my voice was not being taken seriously. And I think Wildcrats really emphasized that within me, is that like kids can have an impact. And I learned about citizen science through them. And some of my first opportunities from a job perspective in high school were citizen science opportunities, where I would contribute to science as a student in high school. And so them introducing this like action that I could take was really empowering to me, because I was the type of kid that really wanted to make an impact. And I just saw them as like my dads. I don't know, like I really looked up to them. Like I really saw them as like someone that I wanted to be growing up. And I still, low-key, I'm 20 and I still want to be them when I grow up. Like I really love the art of science communication. It's something that I've been doing for years, and it's something that I am probably going to continue to do as I pursue my PhD and pursue a teaching position possibly. I also am pretty certain I'm going to continue on this creative educational path as well. And I don't know who I would have been without this huge influence of the Wildcrats on my life. Like, it was genuinely such a huge influence. And I really appreciate that show for cultivating my passion and cultivating who I am as an individual today, because they influenced me in ways that I could possibly never understand now, because I'm so far along this path, you know? Like, if I didn't have that influence growing up, maybe I would have been in a completely different career path. Who knows? But I really appreciate that show for showing me the not only the power of nature through adventure, but also and teaching me a lot of like actual like good factual information, but also the actions that I could take as a kid and give me the tools and inspiration needed to feel confident in my ability to actually have an impact and create action through that. And I think it's through analyzing all of this childhood nature media, there is something to be said about how stories plant seeds of environmental awareness and action within them. And from the perspective of someone who creates science media, I think it's really interesting to see how different aspects of this cultural media contribute in different ways. So, for example, emotional resonance. Stories use a lot of characters, music, and visuals to create lasting emotional connections with nature. I mean, My Neighbor Totoro shows a lot of like very magical visuals. The characters within shows like Bambi really connected kids to empathy and individualism within nature and animals. And anthropomorphism also really connects people in that way. Like, they gave animals human traits to help children relate to them and foster that empathy and concern for their well-being. And I also see a theme of using storytelling as a bridge. Like complex issues like deforestation shown in FernGully, extinction and pollution shown in shows like the Lorax. It's telling that they are made understandable through an urgent yet inspirational narrative. And it's really shown through long-term impact. I mean, studies show that early exposure to nature media can predict pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors in adulthood. And that goes without saying, because it really worked for me. And it worked for a lot of people around me. It is a source of pride, but also like I can relate to people in that way because we've seen the same childhood nature media. And like for me, who is so obsessed with nature and animals and conservation, I feel like I can relate to people in the most basic way because of childhood nature media, where we both appreciated wildcrats as a kid, and I just got crazier about it than they did or something, and we can laugh about that and relate on that. So it's just it's really telling that they have such a long-term impact, and inspiring that they can, and all of them use art as activism tools. And creators often intend to inspire action through these films, whether it's direct calls to protect nature or indirect by nurturing a sense of wonder and responsibility. And I think a lot of thematic elements within some of the topics that I've been talking about with recent episodes in this podcast. Like the last episode I recorded was the episode on iconic naturalists. And a lot of those naturalists also used art as activism, as a way to connect science and passion and creativity and connection. So I think it's just such a powerful tool, and really, really valuable. And I think this moment within my childhood of discovering wildcrats and, doing citizen science and volunteering, this really shifted my life path and influenced me to join nature clubs and recycle and advocate for wildlife. I think it's just really, really, really influential, and that's what I wanted to talk about in this episode, is just like how incredible it is that they can do that, that they have that kind of influence on so many different people. And speaking of which, if anyone who's listening to this has their own story about a piece of childhood nature media that they really cherish and want to share, please comment. And I would love to watch it, or just talk about it, and consider the lasting impact that show had on you, or show, book, movie, whatever it was, like that impact that it had on you and who you are today. And if you have any young people within your life, share that media. It doesn't matter how old it is. I think a lot of those shows really still hold up today. Wildcats certainly does. Bambi does. My Neighbor Totoro is still, those Studio Ghibli productions are still super popular, even though they're a bit older. So, it's, if you have anybody younger in your life, a younger cousin, a child, a niece, nephew, I would just encourage you to show them nature media and guide them towards maybe even nature media that's more modern, maybe that I don't know as an adult, right? Right now in this current moment, maybe I don't know the shows that are currently on PBS or anything, but I think it's really valuable to facilitate learning through these pieces of media for kids. And again, as I'm finishing up with this episode, I just want to remind listeners that art and storytelling is a common theme within almost every episode that I record. It's always art and storytelling. I think it's such a powerful first step in creating real change, and is a testament to the fact that inspiration leads to action, whether it's a small lifestyle change or a lifelong commitment to protecting the planet or a policy change. All of those things can be inspired by art and creativity. And I really encourage everyone listening to think about that in their normal life and how that impacted them, and go along the day with a nostalgic appreciation for media that influenced you as a kid and created some of the values that you still hold today. So with that being said, I want to wrap up today's episode of Wildlight. Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode, and I hope to see you guys next week. And once again, if you liked this podcast today, please like, comment, subscribe. If you're on Spotify listening to this, please follow, or any other podcast platform you can think of. I am there. And I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope it was like a pinch of nostalgia for you, with a hint of scientific, with a hint of scientific theory. So yeah, I will see you guys next week. Bye everyone.